Adolf Hitler, a name that forever altered the course of the 20th century, led to one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. World War II, with its catastrophic loss of life and immeasurable suffering, stands as a testament to the destructive potential of unchecked tyranny. The fascination with Hitler extends to his final days, shrouded in mystery and speculation. In the final chapter of Hitler's life, the once commanding Führer found himself cornered, both physically and mentally. As the Allied forces closed in, the dictator's psychological state deteriorated rapidly, leading to a series of desperate and often irrational decisions. The bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin became his last refuge, a claustrophobic space that mirrored his collapsing world. Here, surrounded by a dwindling circle of loyalists, Hitler faced the inevitable downfall of the Third Reich. Understanding Hitler's final days provides a crucial lens through which we can examine the collapse of Nazi Germany. The bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, known as the Führerbunker, was constructed as an air raid shelter in 1944. By January 1945, it had become Hitler's primary residence and command center. The Führerbunker was a labyrinthine structure, consisting of several rooms connected by narrow corridors. Life in the bunker was a grim and claustrophobic existence. Hitler's physical appearance had deteriorated significantly. He was frail, with a noticeable tremor in his left hand. The Führer spent much of his time secluded in his private quarters or in the map room, poring over strategic plans that bore little relation to the grim reality above ground. The bunker was staffed by a small group of dedicated personnel, including secretaries, military aides, and members of Hitler's inner circle. As Soviet forces encircled Berlin, the sense of isolation within the bunker intensified. The once mighty Third Reich was crumbling, and the Führerbunker had become a tomb for Hitler and his closest confidants. Hitler's psychological state in his final days was a complex tapestry of paranoia, delusion, and despair. The pressures of war, compounded by physical ailments, had taken a severe toll on his mental health. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, Hitler continued to believe in the possibility of a miraculous victory. This irrational optimism was coupled with a deepening paranoia, as Hitler became increasingly suspicious of those around him. One of the most telling signs of Hitler's psychological decline was his obsession with loyalty. The Führer's paranoia was evident in his erratic behavior, frequent outbursts of rage, and a growing reliance on amphetamines and other drugs. His final political testament, dictated in the bunker on April 29, 1945, is a rambling document that reflects his deep-seated hatred and blame towards the Jewish people and others he considered responsible for Germany's downfall. The final days of Adolf Hitler were marked by the presence of several key figures who remained steadfastly loyal to him until the end. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, was one of Hitler's most ardent supporters. Goebbels, along with his wife Magda, chose to stay in the bunker with their 6 children, steadfastly loyal to the Nazi cause. Another key figure in the bunker was Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and head of the party chancellery. Bormann wielded significant influence, controlling access to Hitler and managing the flow of information. General Wilhelm Keitel and General Alfred Jodl, both high-ranking military officers, were also present in the Führerbunker. Their presence underscores the continued military hierarchy that existed even as the Third Reich crumbled. Lastly, Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, played a significant role in his final days. Her decision to join Hitler in the bunker and ultimately commit suicide alongside him demonstrates the personal loyalty and devotion she felt towards the Führer. In the final days of World War II, Adolf Hitler issued a series of desperate and often irrational orders. One of Hitler's last major decisions was the appointment of Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. On April 30, 1945, Hitler dictated his political testament, designating Dönitz as the President of Germany and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Another significant decision was Hitler's order for a scorched earth policy, known as the Nero Decree. Issued on March 19, 1945, the decree called for the destruction of Germany's infrastructure and resources to prevent them from falling into Allied hands. Despite objections from some of his generals, the decree exemplifies Hitler's willingness to sacrifice his own country in the face of defeat. Hitler's final military commands were marked by a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the hopelessness of the situation. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide in the bunker. Hitler's instructions for the disposal of their bodies were carried out by his remaining loyalists, who burned the corpses to prevent them from being displayed by the advancing Soviet forces. The final days of Adolf Hitler were set against the backdrop of the rapid collapse of the Third Reich. By April 1945, Allied forces were advancing on all fronts, and Berlin was surrounded by Soviet troops. The Battle of Berlin, which began on April 16, 1945, was a brutal and decisive engagement. Soviet forces under the command of Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Ivan Konev launched a massive assault on the city. The German defenders, composed of regular army units, Waffen-SS and Volkssturm fighters, put up a fierce but ultimately futile resistance. As the Soviet forces closed in on the city center, the situation within the Führerbunker grew increasingly desperate. Despite the dire circumstances, Hitler remained adamant that Berlin must be defended to the last man. The fall of Berlin was marked by significant events that signaled the end of the Third Reich. The unconditional surrender of the remaining German forces followed on May 8, 1945, officially ending the war in Europe. Eva Braun, often overshadowed by the more prominent figures in Hitler's life, played a significant role in his final days. Born in Munich in 1912, Braun met Hitler in the early 1930s while working as a photographer's assistant. Their relationship, though kept largely out of the public eye, spanned over a decade and culminated in their joint suicide in the Führerbunker on April 30, 1945. Despite the tumultuous nature of their association, she remained devoted to him, enduring long periods of separation and living under constant surveillance. Her loyalty was unwavering, and she often provided a sense of normalcy in the Führer's otherwise tumultuous life. On April 29, 1945, in a brief and private ceremony, Hitler and Braun were married. This act, carried out just bond and commitment to each other. Eva Braun's suicide alongside Hitler was a tragic conclusion to her life. The final hours of Adolf Hitler's life were a culmination of desperation, resignation, and meticulous planning. By April 1945, as Soviet forces encircled Berlin, Hitler's world had shrunk to the confines of the Führerbunker. On April 30, 1945, after days of intense discussions and final farewells with his inner circle, Hitler made the decision to end his life. Hitler had long resolved not to be captured alive, fearing the humiliation and potential exploitation of his capture by the Allies. That afternoon, Hitler and his new wife, Eva Braun, retreated to his private quarters. It is widely accepted that Hitler ingested a cyanide capsule and simultaneously shot himself with his Walther PPK pistol. Braun similarly took cyanide, choosing to die alongside her husband. Shortly after 3:30 p.m., members of Hitler's inner circle discovered the bodies. Following Hitler's explicit instructions, they wrapped the bodies in blankets and carried them to the garden outside the bunker, where they were doused in petrol and set alight. The immediate aftermath of Adolf Hitler's suicide was marked by confusion, disbelief, and a frantic effort to confirm the dictator's death. On May 1, 1945, the day after Hitler's suicide, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had been appointed as Hitler's successor, announced the Führer's death in a radio broadcast. Soviet troops under Marshal Zhukov entered the Reich Chancellery on May 2, 1945. They discovered the charred remains of Hitler and Braun in the garden, along with several other bodies of high-ranking Nazi officials. The identification of Hitler's remains involved significant forensic efforts, including dental records provided by Hitler's dentist, Dr. Hugo Blaschke. These records, along with other physical evidence, confirmed the identity of the dictator's remains. The discovery of Hitler's body raised numerous questions and fueled a myriad of conspiracy theories. Some speculated that Hitler had escaped and was hiding in South America or other remote locations, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary.